Okay. So, Silv, do you want to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about yourself and how you come into the role that you're doing now?
Okay, so yes, so now I'm currently a holistic health and wellness coach. I'm also a menopause workplace trainer for the Henpicked group, part of a network of
Yeah.
licensed trainers that go out and teach how to be menopause friendly in the workplace. But how I got here, so I built a career in the computer games industry. I was very young. I was early 20s, and I kind of worked my way through the ranks and worked in publishing. And it was an industry and a sector that I kind of fell into, but grew to love, and built a whole career around it. But about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe slightly longer now, actually, I'm a keen runner, and I was participating in the Royal Parks half marathon.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was really struggling. All these aches and pains started to appear. Couldn't really put my finger on it, apart from the fact that I thought maybe it's just an age thing now. Maybe I can't do marathon or half marathon running anymore. Um, but the kind of symptoms sort of persisted, and the aches and the pains, and I was getting really forgetful. The brain fog started to set in, and
Yeah, that's horrible, isn't it? Yeah.
just awful. And I think it was because I couldn't really get to the bottom of it myself.
Yeah.
But then also, when I turned to the kind of healthcare system, I felt really let down because I was being pulled from pillar to post, different specialists after different specialists, and I couldn't really get their finger on what was happening. And
That
then
is a real challenge, though, isn't it, what you say about the healthcare system? Because we tend to get sent to different specialists and nobody looks at the whole picture.
yeah,
And there's an expectation that GPs do that, but their training, particularly in terms of women's health, is very limited, isn't it?
absolutely. Well, it's non-existent. It's actually just come into mandatory kind of legislation this year, that they have to have that women's health kind of training, and that's part of the government's women's health strategy that's out, that 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think from my perspective, it was like nobody was really joining the dots, aside from myself. There was complete ignorance on my side as well, because nobody had really talked about the menopause to me. Certainly I didn't get that from my mum. I didn't get that from, any of my kind of peers or friends or whatever.
And it hadn't been in the science curriculum either. I think it's just come into the science curriculum as well.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you were barely taught, yes, there was a slight thing about menstruation and kind of sex education when I was at school, but it was very minimal. And definitely don't ever recall anybody talking about the menopause.
No, no,
Um,
no, neither me. And I was a science teacher until very recently, and I don't remember teaching it. So, it's only very, very recently that it's come in, but we did teach a lot of everything else except that.
yeah, and I think it got to the point when I think I saw the last doctor I saw was an osteopath, because I was having all these issues with my back and my
Yeah.
hip. And he said, "Oh, well, we think you've got a," well, they believed that I had early onset arthritis, and he was like, "Here we go, here's a prescription." And my response to that was, "Well, how long do I have to take this prescription?" And he said, "Well, for the rest of your life." And I was like, "I'm 44 years old. I don't want to be taking a medication when I feel relatively young. I've got at least half of my
Absolutely.
life the rest of this to live." And that was the kind of moment, that light bulb moment, where I thought there has to be a connection between, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional kind of well-being.
Yes.
And that's what set me on that path to becoming a holistic wellness coach, because I was being told, here's a tablet, this will fix it, but we can't get to the root cause of what's actually wrong with you. So
Mm.
here's just a band-aid that
I
we're
was
going
going
to
to say
put
it is,
over it.
isn't it? It's a sticking plaster, really, isn't it, rather than a solution? Absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't like that thought process. And I guess, I was kind of rebelling against that thinking. And then, when I embarked on my certification, I found a school in New York, the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And basically it's about that whole person well-being. So like I said, taking into that account the physical, the mental, the spiritual,
Yeah.
and it's about kind of understanding that we all hunger for different things in life, and that could be things like love, or self-acceptance, for fun, for intimacy, and all of those things really kind of contribute to that overall feeling of well-being and good health and contentment.
And that's really interesting, because one of the things I found out early on in my research was that women in the UK experience more symptoms of menopause and more severe symptoms. And I'm wondering whether our society is kind of limiting one of those hungers and saying you're now at this stage in your life where you're no longer valuable, you're no longer attractive, you're no longer meaningful in society. I'm wondering if that was at play. You were saying about hungers there, and that just came into my head as
Yeah.
something that rang in a bell.
Well, I think when we think about the word menopause and what that connotation, what that brings up, and what the first words we think about when we say that word, it's aging, it's old, it's end of life. It's kind of like there's this narrative that it's the end. That's it.
Yes.
You get past, you get through menopause. It's the end of your life.
And my rebellion is kind of creating this group that says embrace your second spring. It's actually the last third. You've got amazing things you can do with yourself. You're reborn. And
Yeah,
that's where my narrative comes from, really. So yeah, I'm with you there. That language is just wrong, isn't it? That
absolutely.
kind of mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that for me was a really big thing. And now that's why I get really passionate when I talk about it, is that, we need to change that mindset. We need to reframe it. We need to
Absolutely.
change the kind of societal narrative that exists, because there is still this kind of this taboo and this stigma, we mustn't talk about it. We mustn't make ourselves vulnerable. And actually, I think there's strength in vulnerability. I think there's
I agree.
power in showing that, actually, I've got a problem and I'm not afraid to actually tell you or talk about it, not because you want to kind of shove it under people's noses, but I think the more we become free with, being comfortable about talking about this stuff, the
Yeah.
more it's going to be socially accepted. And actually, hopefully, in years to come, it will be just as normal and accepted as things like mental health and,
As you say, that journey that mental health's been on, I was just about to say that, and I can see that menopause is starting to take that journey. It's hitting mainstream. I'm a little worried about some of the messages that hit mainstream in terms of the headlines, the sound bites,
yeah,
like the take your HRT or get Alzheimer's, it's one or the other, and things like that. And that's another of the reasons really for bringing you along into this group, is because, there's so much more, isn't there, to it than is this, as you were saying, this medication doesn't necessarily create all the solutions. But
absolutely.
what is also so scary is that, the research shows that women are being treated for depression, for bowel issues, for bladder issues, for
Yeah.
stomach issues, for all sorts of different things, heart issues, blood pressure issues, and all of them could come back to how menopause affects the way the body works.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm with you there, Jane, with some of the kind of the reports that get kind of distributed. It's kind of a one or another kind of route. They're kind of, for me, I want to, and I maintain this kind of, there are several avenues I would encourage everybody to explore, because
Absolutely.
when we talk about HRT specifically, my personal journey, because of medical history, and I haven't had this confirmed yet, but I think eventually it will get confirmed when I can get to see a specialist, is that I may not perhaps be able to take HRT because of the, the history that I have in my family with
Yeah.
cancer, and specifically with hormonal breast cancer. So, I think that's another thing that, there's this perception that, HRT is the, magic kind of solution for everybody. And actually that isn't the case, because
Yeah.
everybody is different. Everybody's kind of journey through the menopause will be unique to them. And, everybody has to be treated as an individual.
And yet the research is very homogenistic as opposed to, that individual and the challenges. And I was talking to a lady, Fiona, I've forgotten her surname now, who's trying to set up the Menopause Research Foundation to try and bring in funding to generate research in menopause across all of these areas, because it currently seems to be targeted around the medication route, because that's where the big money is.
Yeah.
So it is getting grounding to move forwards. But we also, when you use HRT, it takes ages, doesn't it, to get the right kind of level for you, because it's so personal. But also it can change. Your needs can change, and it may need reviewing as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And with such limited knowledge in some practices, general practices, that in itself, I mean, there are so few specialists around.
Yeah, I think that's changing. I think,
It is, but it's not. It's slow, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very slow. And and I think this is the thing, and certainly when I go and do colleague or manager training in the workspace, this is one of the things that we say is, you need to be patient. You need to be patient about seeing the right people. You need to be patient about the outcomes of what you may be discussing and what you may be prescribed. Because, another thing that we mentioned is that, the preparation or the prescription that you are given, can take several stabs at it to get it right, or get it to a place where it actually feels like it's doing something and it's kind of improving some of the symptoms and challenges people might be feeling. It isn't a case of here's your prescription, you go away and everything is fixed. It simply doesn't work that way. And and I think we can apply that with some of the alternatives that I love to talk about. If you go down the route of complementary sort of therapies and alternative medicines, that firstly doesn't have as much scientific backing or kind of research behind it. But when you're looking into natural kind of supplements or kind of alternative therapies, again, you have to go and see somebody that's an expert in their field. So whether that's a nutritionist, a homeopath, or an alternative kind of avenue, go and see somebody that knows what they're talking about, and actually work with them very closely to try and figure out what you may need. We hear things quite regularly again in the media, things like magnesium, omega-3, vitamin D, vitamin C, and kind of calcium. These are all kind of key things that we need to add into our lifestyles. And
absolutely. And it goes back to a word I use a lot, which is homeostasis. In terms of that balance and redressing the balance, because one of the things I think they're starting to realize is that our when our hormones start to change and our body is readjusting to new balances, a whole range of different things in our bodies become less sensitive.
Yes.
We're less responsive to insulin. We're less responsive. We're more responsive to carbon dioxide. There's a whole range of things that just trigger all of these imbalances. So what is it, if we can't control so much necessarily with the HRT, what is it that we can control? What are the things that we can do for ourselves, the steps that we can take?
Yeah, one of the things that I always encourage, either, when I'm doing it as a workplace training session or whether I'm doing one-on-one coaching, the first thing I encourage everybody to do is a lifestyle MOT. And what I mean by that is you really need to take, stock of what your life looks like. And you need to determine, all of the things that are really serving you well and that are really kind of making you feel good. And, I would encourage more of those things.
Yeah.
But you need to be really kind of honest with yourself and actually then acknowledge all of the things that are not kind of working for you and not serving you well.
What sort of things would we be looking at? If we're looking at a sort of MOT of our lifestyle, what are the questions we would be asking ourselves in that MOT?
Well, firstly, I think you absolutely need to look at nutrition. You've hit the nail on the head. What energy we put into our body basically is how it fuels and how we feel. So, if we're putting processed foods, sugars, alcohol, all of those things that really disrupt the kind of the kind of the true balance or natural balance of the body's kind of operating system.
Well, that's another thing actually that we don't manage as well. Alcohol, our alcohol tolerance changes. You know, that's not a bad thing. From my point of view, if people drink less, that's good. I mean, their liver's going to be happy, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, that's another big factor is that obviously with the changes of estrogen in our body,
Yeah,
you know, that also has an impact on our liver and kind of that detoxification kind of process. And it
absolutely.
can really, really impact that. So you're absolutely right. You know, alcohol can be a real kind of no-no for a lot of women when they're kind of
Yeah,
experiencing that.
yeah. So certainly, I know lots of people, and myself included, who, you know, where alcohol became something that we just rarely touch.
Yeah, yeah, you become less tolerant of it, absolutely.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I think you really need to take a very sort of honest and kind of, you know, holistic view of how you live your life right now and kind of assess the things that are good and the things that are bad. So once you do that, you kind of, you know, and as far as nutrition is concerned, I'm not going to sit here and bang on and tell people what they need to do and what they don't need to do. We all know what a good diet
I mean,
constitutes.
one of the things that there is research around there about is that if we eat a Mediterranean diet, it's rich in those things that will help us get phytoestrogens into our system, which is going to help.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not going to replace, but it's going to help, and you know,
Yeah.
building that into our system.
Yeah.
You know, and also things that are, you know, like fatty fish and things you know, certain fish and things like that. So are those the sorts of things that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, obviously the rainbow of fruit and veggies is
Yeah.
always encouraged. Then things like, you know, the very good proteins and fishes that have that high content of
Yeah.
omega-3s,
So the omega-3s and
nuts,
there's two different sorts, isn't it? Is it
uh,
omega-5, the other one
eight.
as well?
Is it 5 or 8?
I can't, it might be 8 actually. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
something
think
like
it's
that,
8.
isn't it? Yeah.
So they're the key ones, certainly as you're going through the menopause. And then things like, you know, legumes, so whole
Yeah.
grains, you
And
know,
a lot
they're
of those will give us the phytoestrogens, won't they?
correct,
Yeah.
yes, you know, and more importantly, there's a lot of big fiber content. So, you know,
Yeah.
fiber is also a critical
Help
key.
with the bowels, which are affected by the hormone changes. Well, every
Absolutely.
element of our body, because of the hormone changes, the balance changes, and it all has to realign, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And if
absolutely.
we've been managing with things out of kilter because we've not been doing the things that are good for us,
Yeah,
and when we hit menopause, our body goes, "Hang on a minute, you haven't been doing this right, and I'm going to show you."
yeah, exactly,
You know?
exactly. Um,
So what about things like we hear a lot, don't we, about things like exercise and uh, weighted exercises and things like that. Does that
yeah.
come into this looking at the sort of whole holistic approach to it?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
exercise is definitely part of that initial MOT. And, you know, and the reason why we say that resistance training or strength training is important is obviously our bone density kind of diminishes as we
Yeah.
get older. And in particular, when, you know, our estrogen and our kind of progesterone levels start to fluctuate quite a lot. Um, and, you know, I think it's important that we build that kind of that muscle mass through that type of training rather than there's this kind of image of, you know, you having to run on a treadmill for an hour every day, you know, and actually a lot of women will say, you know, I haven't changed my routine and yet I'm eating exactly the same, but I'm putting on weight. And usually it's this visceral fat
Yeah. Well,
that sits
that's
around
the
the
area,
kidney.
isn't it,
Yeah.
that potentially also releases estradiol, doesn't it? So
Yes.
I think that's another of the reasons we put that layer of fat around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just say that mine's my BioPrem for my cold water swimming, but yeah.
I love that.
I could probably
Love
do with
that.
less BioPrem, but I do throw myself in very cold water.
Yes. No, it's probably good you have that extra. But yeah, no, and that is absolutely you know, again, it's that one of those preconceptions that we have to continue doing, you know, lengthy workouts and actually that's a load of old tosh, you know.
So what, when we talk about resistance training, I mean, when we talk about exercise as well, there's a lot of evidence now that sort of high intensity aerobic workout for some people is good, but I'm more about the resistance training. I mean, for a lot of people, when we say this, they think, "Oh my God, I don't want to go down the gym."
You don't have to. You don't
And
have
that's why I
to.
want, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the thing.
absolutely. You can actually use your body as your kind of weight, using, doing those specific exercises where you are using your body weight is just as good as lifting, a dumbbell or using the resistant bands or anything like that. And actually, I would argue, things like Pilates, things like yoga even,
Yes.
it's all about kind of, using those muscles in a way that actually creates that kind of resistance for you. You don't have to go to a gym. I don't go to a gym, and I use everything that I have at home. I still run occasionally because that's always something I've used in particular for my mental health. It's
Yeah, and
great
I mean,
clear
there's
my head.
benefits, aren't there, for mental
Yeah,
health with all of these things,
yeah.
and that it can't be a bad thing, really. But I mean, I talk as well. I mean, if you do things like gardening is
Yes.
resistance. It's not always getting an exercise video on and following a plan. It's about making sure you've got this activity in your lifestyle, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely advocate that, on the day that and we have to learn to listen to our bodies in this period of
Yeah,
of our time. If you are forcing yourself to work out when you absolutely are exhausted, you're just not feeling it, you're just not wanting to, then just, if you haven't got a dog, just get your
dogs
walking
are
shoes
amazing. You can
on.
take them, and with my sprocker, I definitely have resistance training. It's like holding him back. Please don't run away.
Exactly.
Don't pull so hard.
Yeah, exactly. So, and for me, that's a double whammy. You're out in nature. Okay, yes, the weather might not be great, but, get out there, look around, immerse yourself in that beauty, that natural beauty that exists here, and kind
Absolutely.
of remove yourself from those screens and, being indoors, get that fresh air. They're the sorts of things that I also advocate as part of the exercise. It doesn't have to be this kind of.
And that, there's so much evidence now, isn't there, about green spaces and blue spaces and how good they are for our mental and physical health. So,
Absolutely.
adding exercise into those spaces, perfect, really, isn't it, in terms of looking after ourselves?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
But even sitting out in them is good for you. Because
Oh,
then that
oh,
mindfulness, that calm, because that's stress is also, I would say, part of this whole audit of the body and your lifestyle, I would imagine.
yeah, absolutely. Menopause and stress do not go well together. And we know that stress, it's that fight or flight kind of feeling, and it's kind of the sympathetic nervous system that's kind of on overdrive. And, what we want to do is, you know, decrease that level of cortisol, which is the stress hormone that gets released in our bodies when we're kind of operating in that kind
Yeah.
of zone. And that in itself is a hormone thief to all of those other vital hormones that are trying to generate within the body.
It does, because our adrenal glands are where we can generate estrogen, but if we're generating cortisol, we ain't going to be generating estrogen.
Exactly.
So it's a
Exactly.
double whammy, isn't it?
It
It's like,
absolutely is.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't have any estrogen. Sorry, you're too stressed.
Yeah.
You don't
Indeed.
need estrogen when you're stressed. You got to run away. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. So, for me, it's a really easy thing to say these days, like try and lower your stress levels, and I think, how do we do that in a practical way? And I always, and you've said it already, you've hit the nail on the head, trying to practice that mindfulness, that being present in the moment, not getting kind of carried away by some of the things that, we sometimes don't necessarily have to kind of concern ourselves with. And I know that, life isn't linear, right?
No,
It
no,
would be
definitely.
really easy for us all if it was, but it isn't. And we have multiple kind of influences that kind of create stress for us. And it's just about, as I said, it's about taking stock of your life. What are the things that are not serving you well? And there may
Yeah.
be some really difficult things that you have to acknowledge and accept. Are you working in a place that you hate? Do you have a career that, is not nourishing you? It's not kind of feeding you
These are the
well.
questions that I knew were the answers to, but at the same time, there was the financial pressure. And, we have got that extra stress, haven't we?
Yes.
And that financial pressure, this job is not serving me anymore, except for the money it's bringing in.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah,
do I find an alternative? We have to acknowledge those things. And that's why,
of
but
course.
finding calm, that calm mind, calm body is
Yeah.
so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the connection between our physical and our mental it's absolutely intrinsic. And you know,
Well,
you
there is a physical connection between the brain and the rest of the body, isn't there? We often operate as if we're up here or down here,
yeah,
and
you're
actually
right.
the two are connected.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. You know, and I think we it will serve more people well if they acknowledge and understand that
Yeah.
quickly, and then try to put practices into their day-to-day lifestyle, which will kind of support that and will kind of nourish that. And, you know, and let that be the kind of emphasis of their energy. And, you know, there are lots of other things in as far as the kind of alternative therapies are concerned, you know, and I could talk about it, you know, things like CBT, right? We all know
Yeah.
cognitive behavioral therapy has now been cited
I was
as,
going to say it's now in there, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. And when we think about it, the reason why it actually makes sense is, you know, CBT is often associated with patients that might have anxiety, depression, and those things are very, very common in women, or the traits of those feelings are very common in women that are going through the menopause because of
Absolutely. Yeah.
those, you know, those dips in, you know, we talk about testosterone being the libido kind of hormone, but it's also the confidence
Yes.
hormone,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, so then we begin to understand, you know, when women are more sensitive to that decline, they're going to start feeling that lack of confidence. They're going to be more anxious, certainly if their progesterone is kind of, you know, diminished. You know, that will induce that anxiety. We know that when estrogen levels kind of dip as well, you know, that also impacts things like progesterone. It affects things like our sleep. So we know
Yes.
that when we don't sleep very well, you know, that can maybe induce things like that brain fog and that, you know, being able to, you know, memory recollection, that cognition of our
Well,
brain.
certainly estrogen is a really important neurotransmitter, isn't it? And
Yeah.
the chemical messengers in the brain change as we go through perimenopause, and actually the amount of white matter drops briefly. But the good news is it recovers.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and we're still better than men in terms of our white matter and access to it post menopause, although we drop below them during
Yeah.
perimenopause. So, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? But I wonder whether, you know, it would help people to understand what's going on in their heads if they think about what it was like when they were a teenager as
Yeah.
well, because there's a lot of rewiring of the brain, for want of a better phrase, with the changes in the chemical neurotransmitters.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I'm a great believer of things like using affirmations. If you say something often enough and you repeat it often enough, it's actually scientifically proven that
Well, absolutely,
yeah,
because what we tend to be, and this is where the mindset comes in
yeah,
terms of menopause, isn't it? And the mindset program I've got running, it's because if we constantly tell ourselves something negative,
yes,
it becomes a truth.
absolutely.
And if
Yeah,
we constantly tell ourselves something positive, it
yeah,
will also become a truth because we
yeah.
see the world through the lens of our thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, spot on. And, you know, and I think that that is definitely another aspect that I always encourage is to start thinking about, you know, start boosting your resilience by putting those practices of positive affirmations to kind of, you know, kind of exercise that feeling of gratitude. And, you know, a lot of people think that that's, you know, a little bit out there and it's not scientifically backed. And
It
actually,
is. There's some evidence, isn't there, for affirmations? Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, and there is that, you know, people are doing this, you know, this research that's actually showing that not only is it helping the aspects like anxiety and those feelings of depression and lack of confidence, but it is kind of improving, you know, kind of just the kind of the general mindset and feeling of that individual physically as well.
Yes.
And you know, I definitely am an advocate of that and definitely encourage that with a lot of my coaching clients, you know, journaling, you know, if you are having a particularly bad day, get rid of those thoughts, but get rid of them, write them down.
And similarly, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you've got these thoughts just going through your head, you know, a lot of the sort of problems with sleep during perimenopause, journaling's a really good way there.
Yeah,
Literally just getting a piece of paper and scrawling them all down
yeah,
and then screwing it up and throwing it away.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
unless it's something you want to hang on to, but if it's something you think, if your mind's going crazy about something you're trying to do, writing it down means your brain goes, oh, no, I've written it down. I don't need to remember it.
absolutely.
So it then relaxes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a good tool.
Yeah.
Scrolling stuff down is such a good tool.
Yeah, and I think it's powerful. I think it's powerful to acknowledge your emotions and your feelings, because I think
Yes,
that's another thing that we're all really kind of guilty of, is kind of suppressing, our true thoughts, our true kind of vulnerability
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
emotions. But I think once you've done that, it's really cathartic. You feel much lighter. You feel kind of like you've kind of been able to kind of almost express yourself, but without actually needing a person there to listen and hear
Yeah,
you.
exactly. Yeah.
And I think that that naturally just puts you in a much calmer space, a much kind of freer space. And I think, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and for me, it's the cornerstone of well-being, is sleep.
Yes.
You absolutely have to address that. And that is definitely part of that MOT, is that if you are struggling with your sleep as you are progressing through peri and that whole menopausal kind of phase, it's something that could potentially, you kind of almost go into this kind of vicious cycle of kind of symptoms, because if it's one thing that starts off as one thing, it's just going to kind of keep escalating.
Well, we all know when we don't sleep how difficult we find
Yeah,
thinking, how difficult, so if that becomes a perpetual thing,
yeah,
all of those symptoms like brain fog and depression and anxiety, or anything that's to do with the way the brain functions, is essentially going to struggle. But also, we crave carbohydrates when we're tired.
yes, yes,
And that's going to put our sugar levels up in our blood,
yeah,
and it's going to cause, the insulin issues and all
yeah.
of that. One of the things about sleep that I read was when you eat matters, because of that crash, the insulin cycling,
Yes.
and the insulin and adrenal cycles. Because if you eat late, it can cause your body to suddenly go, I need to release sugar in the middle of the night. And
Mhm.
that does that by releasing cortisol, which is, of course, the waking hormone.
Correct.
So
Yes.
it wakes you up in the middle of the night. So if you're waking up in the middle of the night, you've got no idea why.
Yeah.
Looking at when you're eating perhaps is a good idea.
Absolutely. And actually there's that there seems to be a popular time, it's between 2 and 3 in the morning. It's showing scientifically again that that is when you're most likely to have that release of cortisol
Yes.
because of that spike.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think again that is an individual thing. We all are very different. Our lifestyles are very different. I know from my own perspective, there's this whole thing about intermittent fasting and things like that has been shown to kind of help those that might have severe symptoms. I definitely adopt that, but I don't adopt it in a way that it sounds that I'm starving myself or anything like that. I eat within a window within the 24-hour period, and then I don't eat for 14 hours. And that's
Yeah.
essentially what that intermittent fasting looks like for
Yeah.
me. So I have all of my meals within a very kind of short time frame within the day. And then the rest of the time, obviously, I'm either sleeping or I'm not eating.
But routine's important for sleep, isn't it, as well?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what you're talking about there is a routine in a sense, isn't it, as well? The routine is
Absolutely.
definitely very important. We kind of need to teach our brain when it should be asleep and when it should be awake.
Yes, indeed. And things
And if
like
we teach it the opposite, it does the opposite.
indeed. So, like if we're kind of on our phones right up until the moment that we get into bed, our minds are still kind of, processing what we're kind
Yeah.
of dealing with.
Never mind the white light that's actually creating that wakefulness in us as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's kind of just getting into that routine of saying, right, 2 hours pre-bed, no more kind of, screen time, kind of making sure that your bedroom is fairly cool, because that's another thing to prove,
Yes.
certainly when you're menopausal, you definitely want a cool room.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, making sure that the kind of, again, this sounds, for some individuals they'll probably think I'm, crazy for saying this, but the feng shui of your room, if it's untidy, if your environment feels cluttered, your mind is going to feel cluttered when you
You
go.
also sleep better if your bed linen is clean.
Yes.
The clean, so
Freshness.
fresh bed linen,
Yes.
you sleep better. So there's a whole range of things that are going on here that
Yeah.
might scientifically maybe not make sense, but they do make a difference.
Yeah,
So they're worth paying
absolutely.
attention to, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And I think for me, the other tool that I use a lot is meditation.
Yeah.
you know, getting into bed, you know, kind of, you know, that deep breathing kind of, to start the meditation, to kind of really lower your kind of nervous system. Because again, that's critical, is bringing your nervous system back to a
Yeah.
much calmer space. And then going into, you know, a 5-10 minute meditation. And I think a lot of people, again, have this preconception that you can't have thoughts or things going through your head. You absolutely can. You know, you just need to calm your mind, in the sense that, okay, thank you for coming in, but I need you to go away whilst I'm just doing this, and just being, again, in that moment of kind of,
It's that noticing but not paying attention to, isn't
exactly,
it? That's not that easy, but when you, it's like everything else, you have to
train
practice.
it. You have to train your
Yeah,
brain. Yeah.
yeah,
And,
absolutely.
you know, again, it goes to all of those things. You know, you do it often enough, you start to see the benefits of it, or you start, you know, in the case of affirmations, you start to believe those thought processes.
Yeah.
So it is about kind of just retraining yourself and
I
getting
guess it's
habit.
each of us, though, are an experiment of one, aren't we? So different combinations of different things work for different people, don't they? But
Yes.
you know, it's definitely important to experiment.
Absolutely, you know, and I think one of the core concepts of a holistic coach is, you know, bio-individuality. We're all different.
Yeah,
You know, what works for me won't necessarily work for you. You know, we could be diametrically opposed to kind of what works for you and what works for me. And that's
absolutely.
fine, but you have to acknowledge that and say, I need to be patient with myself. I need to not be afraid to try new things. And you know, because there are certain things that I'd never tried before. Certainly things like sound therapy, or I'm just trying to think of some other, cold water therapy, which I'm sure
Or
you
cold water therapy, definitely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? There's anecdotal evidence for cold water therapy,
yeah.
usually given by people who use cold water. There's no sort of randomized trials or anything.
No,
But with all of these things, it's about consistency.
yeah,
Nothing ever works overnight.
no,
It's no good trying something, ah, that didn't work for me. You know, whether we're
exactly,
talking HRT or we're talking holistic approaches,
absolutely,
there's no overnight, but there are some clear principles in terms of well-being
yeah.
that apply, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and I think one of my things that I've always tried to advocate and kind of encourage, you know, in order to try and achieve success with the goals of the particular client is, you know, in order to achieve these long-term kind of behavioral changes, because that's essentially what they are,
Absolutely.
you know, in order to do that and to make sure that they are long-term sustainable habits, you have to start small.
Yes.
And, you know, and I think the other thing as well is that, you know, you can't go down the route of elimination completely. Whilst you know, going back to what I was saying earlier, you have to kind of eliminate what's not working for you. You, you can't do that brutally, because you're setting yourself up to fail.
And also that's right. It's whenever you take the view that I can't, then immediately you've got
Yeah,
this argument going on in yourself, and it's really hard to address it. So when you're looking at these things, it's looking at them in a positive light. I
yes,
will do such and such, not I won't do such and such.
yes.
It's again, it comes down to the language we use with ourselves, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it absolutely, language spot on, and reframing it and kind of saying, how is this going to benefit me?
Absolutely. You know, there's been research out there, you know, that talks about why is it that people who know this medication that they're going to take, say heart medication, that if they don't take it, they will die. Why do they not take it?
Yeah,
Because they know that they will die if they don't take it. You know, and it's all about the way our brain is, you know, programmed and thinks, and we have to kind of unpick that, don't we?
yeah,
And as a scientist, I would say, you know, don't change everything at once,
no,
because you don't know, you know, for a starter, that's very stressful. And we've already talked about not wanting stress. But secondly, you won't work out which it is that's working, or if something's not working, which it is that's not working.
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah,
so it's little tweaks, as you say, and
absolutely.
carefully planned so you're not putting too much stress on your body and your mind, and that you can tell whether it's working or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Is
And
there one more thing that you would give as a piece of advice to ladies uh, in perimenopause, or entering it, or during it, or post?
yeah, I think the one thing I would say is, you know, I think just, you know, be kind to yourself, because I think we have a habit, you know, and again, I think this might be that societal pressure of, You know, we strive for this image of perfection. You know,
Yes,
we want to be everything to everyone. So we want to be brilliant colleagues, we want to be brilliant partners, we want to be brilliant, you know, parents, or whatever your life looks
absolutely
like.
is.
We want to
And
be,
often we label ourselves with those as well, don't we?
yeah. And, you know, and I think, you know, we just need to kind of take a step back and just say, I am enough. I am doing enough.
You
And
know what? That was my International Women's Day post. You are enough. I mean, because that is so important, isn't it?
absolutely, you know, and I think, you know, cut yourself some slack, be kind to yourself. And actually, you know, if any of my coaching clients are watching this, they are going to laugh, because I always say this, you know, that analogy of put your gas mask on first before you try and do
Absolutely.
anything else.
Yep.
You know, and I think that will serve you well, certainly in this transitional period, which can be some, you know, very challenging for some more than others.
Yeah.
You know, and again, we don't ever want to assume that women of this age are all going through the same story, because they're not.
They're not. No. And comparison is really not a helpful thing at all, is it?
Exactly.
Because it can either breed, why am I suffering more than them? It's not fair, you know, or it can, oh God, am I going to get that? You know, it's really, we are all individuals and everything will be different for each and every one of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
compassion, you are enough.
Yes,
I think that's a good place to finish on, actually.
good.
The message to all of our ladies is you are enough. Be compassionate to yourself.
Yeah.
Give yourself time and space to
Yes.
breathe.
Yeah.
And as you said, put your gas mask on, or as I would say, put your oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
We've both got the same phrase, or I talk about the first rule of first aid: look after yourself first.
Yes.
You know, so
Absolutely.
absolutely. Can I just thank you for your time this evening? It's been really fascinating chatting to you, Silvana. And if you want to put stuff in the Facebook group about a bit more about your work, then please feel free to do so. That would be
Thank
great.
you.
Put some links in there and things
Well,
like that
thank
as
you.
well.
Thank you, Jane. It's been great, and always love chatting with you.